Welcome to a Money Matters special where we're talking about a topic that is on everyone's mind right now as we're working from home and we're in this COVID economy called the Great Economic Pause. And there's so many things on our minds as consumers, whether we're retired or we're still in the middle of work or we're working from home. There's this heightened level of anxiety because we've been forced to have so much change in just a short period of time. And not only that is that our home routines are different than they've been. We're not necessarily getting up as early maybe for the bus I have 4 kids, to get kids on the bus. And then kids say, well, we don't quote, really have school tomorrow, so we can stay up late. And then sleep patterns get thrown off. And then that it gets thrown off a little bit. And the next thing you know, you've got one of maybe the most precious health-related variables in your life, which is sleep, that gets out of whack. And I've been thinking a lot about that over the last couple of months. And I have heard through, and I've been speaking, I spoke at a Barron's conference last February when the world was still open, just before it shut down, and heard about Dr. Melissa Milanak, who, by the way, joins me on the line. Melissa, hello.
Hello, Wes.
Who's a PhD in clinical and community psychology. And she specializes in sleep and sleep anxiety, which is exactly what sleep disorders and stress and trauma. She's at the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston, and does a ton of speaking about this topic and talks about how we can really be healthier through sleep and get through anxiety. And I guess this is, I don't know of a time when we need you more than right now, Melissa. I bet you've been ultra busy.
Oh, very busy. I mean, it's very common right now to have 14 and 16-hour days, but happy to do it and be glad to be helping people.
Well, let me ask you that when you say, just maybe as a background for our audience here, we're doing this via Zoom video and we're doing it via audio, so this is a podcast as well. Melissa, what in a normal day for you at University of South Carolina, where are you? Are you doing one-on-one with people that are having some anxiety or sleep disorders, or where is kind of your sweet spot, and where do you spend most of your day?
Sure. Well, it's a lot of different places. So I'm at, as you said, MUSC, the Medical University of South Carolina there. So I'm an associate professor there. I see patients within the sleep and anxiety treatment and research program. So I can be doing one-on-one therapy sessions, working with folks on their sleep, on their anxiety. My clinical background started as PTSD and trauma and grew into the world of sleep because sleep is such a prevalent part of that, and we can talk about that later if you want. But so I'm doing that part, also doing research. The research team that I was working with was a co-investigator on a grant to put out a training actually for treatment for insomnia, CBTI, that just launched, which is very exciting with my colleagues there. And so doing research, treatment, that work. Additionally, I'm a clinical assessment advisor for a company called Psychological Assessment Resources. So I spend a lot of time throughout the day consulting with hospitals and medical systems and providers to figure out their best practices for assessments, and especially right now as we're transitioning to virtual care, because there's so much of the social distancing, figuring out ways to still work with patients and clients, but doing it with that transition to virtual, but still following all the HIPAA rules and making sure that everyone's taken care of. So 1 minute I'm working with a patient, 1 minute I'm, consulting and working with colleagues. So never a dull moment.
Well, I guess right out of the gate, my question to you is, are you seeing increased cases or increased anxiety and more sleep issues now that we're in the middle of the strangest, maybe scariest global pandemic that we've experienced since the Spanish flu? And we didn't have the modern media back then to heighten our fear. And you can't turn on the television without seeing a death count, an infection count, and somebody coming out in a body bag. And I know that just the visual of that is so scary. Yeah. And I wonder, are you already seeing this you seeing a surge in anxiety at all?
Oh, very much. So one of the things that we're seeing is that a lot of individuals that maybe had, some baseline anxiety, or maybe they've had a few panic attacks in their life, or they thought they were anxious, or maybe they sometimes had disrupted sleep, that this has really triggered a much more significant onset to that. One of the things that we launched a few weeks ago at MUSC was a resiliency clinic. and it's actually a free clinic for healthcare providers, those frontline workers, for them to get free emotional support and mental health care right now. And so I'm coordinating that, working with my colleagues at MUSC right now. And we've had so many, even just of the frontline individuals saying, you know, I'm used to stress. I'm used to working with this, but right now there's all these added stresses. Am I going to have the resources? Am I going to take germs home to my family? You know, finding those balance. And so a lot of people that even maybe just had that general worry, or every once in a while, every person's had a bad night of sleep, and that's okay. But we're seeing so much of a higher prevalence and exacerbation, kind of the frequency and severity is just through the roof.
Well, what about then, and I think about have people been mentioning the economic stress at all? Now, if you're in healthcare, you're not worried about losing your job at this point. You're worried about getting sick. There's an overwhelming demand right now, I would think, for healthcare. Does that play into this as well? Are you hearing like, gosh, I'm worried about the economy is in virtual shutdown. I'm worried about paying rent, collecting rent. Is there any of that right now for you?
You're hearing a lot of it. I mean, again, so from the healthcare side, there are, though, lots of realignments, and actually a lot of places that unfortunately are having layoffs and furloughs, because if you're not having patients coming into a clinic, you may not need all of that support staff on site, and having to realign for funding and different resources. I think it affects every single industry in all kinds of different ways, but there is a lot from the economic side of individuals wondering, am I going to be able to pay my bills? You know, what's going to happen next? I've had some really sad, depressing cases of individuals saying, you know, how can I fund my insurance, or I have my business that I've worked on, and especially a lot of entrepreneurs or people that maybe they've been doing a lot of their work, but they don't have a lot of employees and are qualifying for the funding relief. You know, individuals with like art galleries and other kinds of components that now are seen as luxury resources. So we're getting in everybody from across the page, but there is also a lot of that fear of either getting infected for themselves, or for a lot of healthcare workers bringing those germs home to their families.
Let me ask you about sleep. And I don't know, maybe we just start back. How did you end up in the sleep world? And then let's talk about some of these sleep myths that are out there.
Sure. So as I said, you know, long time ago, when I started, it's hard to believe it's been about 20 years at this point, but I was specializing in trauma and PTSD, and a lot of my career actually started around September 11th at that time, and I was doing work there, and then I was going back and forth doing a lot of work in Northern Ireland with the Troubles, and also doing work now still currently there and in South Africa, and working, you know, a lot of different areas. And really trauma was the first area that I was doing a lot of work, but what I kept seeing was sleep problems. And when I came to the medical university, to MUSC, 9 years ago, I was working with a group there, and they were looking at the epidemiological studies and all these pieces with trauma, and realized that sleep was really the most prevalent. Over 90% of people with PTSD were having these problems. And as I was working with patients, whether they were depressed or anxious, sleep just kept coming up and kept coming up. And so I started to really delve into that area and realize that no matter what anyone is struggling with, it's such a huge component, not the nightmares, but really the insomnia and the shutting the brain off. And for most people, when your sleep is not in the right place, everything else is off. And so
it's
really
almost like
delve into that.
It's almost like this two-headed monster if it's not working right, because it not only does the anxiety create less sleep, and the less sleep makes you even more vulnerable and maybe gives you even more anxiety. And then from a health perspective, I don't know how many times I've read in just the last 2 months, more than I've ever read in my life, just how important sleep is for your immune system. So it's like this virtual negative cycle that happens, I guess, if you're not sleeping.
Well, and if you think about it, if you've ever had that big event the next day or something going on, and you think to yourself, okay, I have to sleep well together. What happens when you try to force yourself to have a good night of sleep?
So
the complete
true,
opposite. Yeah. You know, if you've ever tried to shut off your computer and you push the button and then you get that message says, you know, such and such running in the background, the hardware is ready to shut down. But if that's off, if that mind isn't shutting off, no matter what you try to do, and the more you try to force it, the worse it becomes. And so what happens is we perpetuate that then we start thinking about, you know, the bed becomes this scary place, and, oh, well, how much sleep am I going to get tonight? Am I going to be able to fall asleep? And then we start telling ourselves, well, if I don't sleep, then I'm not going to be able to focus, or, you know, and then we just build it up. And then that anxious response is what we start associating with our bed instead of rest and relaxation. And so that's a lot of where there's so many little tips and things that we can do to really restructure. But the good news, the kind of hope statement out of all of that, is that we really can retake control over our sleep. And even with anxiety, and that's something we may talk about today, but there are tips and tricks to be able to shut your brain off and to be able to reprogram it, and to be able to do that with some behavioral changes. You don't have to take a pill to change your sleep.
Before we get to how do we retake control of our sleep, let's talk about, though, I guess the question that so many of us have is just about, let's talk about sleep in general. How individualistic is it? Is it 7 to 8 hours for most people? How do you look at what is normal or good sleep for most of the population? Go ahead.
So one of the biggest myths is that every person needs 8 hours of sleep. And so while there's an average, the way I say is look at it like a shoe size. So like the average woman may wear an 8.5 or a 9, but somebody wears a 10 and somebody wears a 6.5. And so the thing is to figure out, what you hit the nail on the head with, is what is your ideal sleep window? And when we're determining our ideal sleep window, the way that I tell people to know that you're in that sweet spot is that when you get in bed, and the first thing is bed should be reserved for sleep. So we say sleep and sex, that's it. We shouldn't be reading in bed, watching TV in bed, all those other things. You want your brain to see the bed and associate it with sleep and rest. So if you're getting in bed, you're falling asleep within 10 to 15 minutes, you're sleeping straight through the night, maybe minus that bathroom break, and then you're getting up the next morning, you wake up, you're getting out of bed, we're not hitting the snooze button a million times, we're not really hard to drag ourselves out of bed, and we're not feeling that fatigue throughout the day. That's when you know you've hit that sweet spot. But for a lot of people, what happens is that life circumstances happen. Maybe we have a new baby or a puppy or a change in life or commuting, and we're either not getting enough sleep or we're not sleeping at the right times, and we're in that survival mode. Well, there's things that we do during that survival mode. The problem is then your baby's sleeping through the night, but you're not. And so what happens is sometimes it's understanding those do's and don'ts of sleep with those little tweaks, and how do we determine that ideal sleep window to really be able to get us back to that right place.
So give us your prescription then on trying to get yourself into that good. I love the analogy of eating at the same time every day. Your body then can get into a really good pattern so that you feel more awake when you're supposed to wake up. How do you do that for somebody that in general is not necessarily sleeping well, or they have an erratic schedule maybe? What is an ideal way to practice getting your sleep?
Sure. And you actually touched on one of the biggest things that we're seeing right now with this COVID kind of time is that people that had schedules and routines, now they don't have as much of it, because you can stay up later, or you can sleep in because you don't have that commuter on the bus. And same thing with your kids, and it's really important, that schedule and routine. So let me answer that question first. I know we have a few things we can get into, but one of the first things for any person is to say, okay, right now in a 24-hour period, if you added up all of the actual sleep, not time in bed, because a lot of people will spend more time in bed than sleeping. But if you said, okay, right now, if you fall asleep for 2 hours, you're awake, you're asleep, you take a nap, if you added all of those times and you said, okay, on average, I'm getting, say, as you said, 7 hours of sleep. Okay. So then what we would say is, okay, what is the earliest that you have to wake up across the week? So maybe some weeks, sometimes you're getting up at 6, sometimes you're getting up at 7. So if 6 was the earliest you had to wake up, we would set that as your wake time. And we would then work 7 hours back. So your window for the next 7 days would be 11 to 6. That's a 7-hour window. That means we're not getting in bed at 10 o'clock and reading, not even at 10:45. So at 11 o'clock, you shut off the light, you get in bed. And then you are in bed until 6 a.m. Now, if you are in bed for longer than 15 minutes and you're not falling asleep, you actually should get out of bed. Do something boring. Don't turn on all the lights. Don't check your emails. But you want to be doing things to slow your brain down, and we'll talk about how to shut that off. And then you get back in bed when you're tired. But the key is, if your wake time is 6 a.m., even if you didn't fall asleep until 4, you still get out of bed at 6. And you stay awake the whole day, because we want to build up enough sleepiness to go to sleep the next night. That's why actually naps in general aren't helpful. If your mom ever said—
They're not helpful. They're not helpful.
Did your mom ever say to you, don't eat a snack, you'll ruin your dinner?
Yes.
You need to build up enough hunger so that you can eat your full meal. So if your body needs a total of 7 hours, and you nap for an hour throughout the day, and now you only have 6 hours of sleepiness at night, and then you go to bed and you wonder why you're not sleeping all the way through, and possibly then also cheating yourself out of REM at the end of the night. You see how that all goes. Now, it doesn't mean that you'll never take a nap again. And for folks with shift work and erratic schedules, there are always exceptions to the rule, but you have to set the rules first before you can have the exceptions.
So ideally, you set your earliest wake time, and you work back from that. And it might take you some time to get into that right pattern, because in the beginning, let's say you can't fall asleep, then you have to train yourself to almost schedule your sleep. You can't go to sleep in 15 minutes. You get up, you mill around, you go back to bed in 15 or 20 minutes, and then hopefully you're getting into that pattern.
Yes.
And then would you recommend, though, waking up at the same time every single day?
Yes, so we want two things on that. So one, you want to sit, whatever that schedule is based on what you're getting right now. Now, we don't want it to ever be less than 5 hours. So if you're only getting 3 hours right now, we still want to start with at least a 5-hour window. And of course, there's exceptions to the rules. Individuals with, seizures and bipolar, again, there's exceptions, but this is just for the general average person. So you would set that wake time and you would stick to that schedule for 7 days. After 7 days, if you're falling asleep within that 10 to 15 minutes, sleeping straight through, waking up and still feeling tired, then what we do is every week, every 7 days, we add 15 minutes on to the bedtime. We never change the wake time. So instead of being 11 to 6, now it's going to be 10:45 to 6. And we do that for 7 days until we find the sweet spot. The problem, what happens is that if somebody, say they have a tough time, they don't fall asleep until, maybe 3 that morning, then they get this myth in their head of, well, I have to go to bed earlier to catch up. And what happens is as we extend that window, let me give you one of my awful analogies. Okay, so if you have 6 inches of pizza dough and you have a 6-inch pie pan, and we put the 6 inches in and we spread it out, is it safe to say that pizza dough is going to be pretty even and thick all the way through, right?
Sure.
But if I take that same 6 inches of pizza dough and I now put it in a 10-inch pie pan and I spread it out to the edges, it's not going to be even and thick, right? There's going to be holes and gaps and thin spots. So what happens is we try to force ourselves to spend more time in bed than we need. Actually restricting that window actually gives us much more consistent, consolidated sleep. But think about it. If you live in a climate where it's cold and it's wintertime, you want to cozy up in that bed. Maybe there's just, I don't want to deal with the stress today. I just want to throw the covers over my head. Bed becomes that kind of place where people are hiding, or that's where they're relaxing or getting away from everything. But what happens is we actually end up weakening the strength of our sleep that we can get from it, just like that pizza dough. Does that make sense?
I love that analogy. I think it's a really good one. And the other thought here is that, so if I'm up, let's say, and again, I keep using examples of my COVID life, like everybody, I hadn't maybe caught up on any Netflix forever. And I thought, I get to watch Ozark season 3. Ozark season 3 is so good. Instead of me going to bed at 11, all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'm going to watch one more episode. Now I go to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning. That's pretty late for me. And then we still get up with the kids because let's say they still have to get to do school. Am I better the next, you're saying the next night, in a no Ozark world, Ozark's done, there's no more binging. Then I don't want to go to bed at 9 or 10 to try to go to bed really early to catch up. Don't do that.
No. So the thing is that we really want to get ourselves on that schedule. And when your body knows when it's getting that sleep, as I said, it will adjust. Now, think of it this way, right? So if you skipped dinner on Friday night, right? Saturday, you're going to feel really hungry. Of course, you have more hunger because you didn't satisfy it. But if you ate 2 dinners, would your body be able to process all of those calories?
Right.
So it's almost the same thing where I'm never saying that you're not going to have a time where you're so sleep deprived. And for a lot of people, they are just not letting their bodies get the right amount of sleep. And then they crash on the weekends and they try to catch up on it. And while you may feel less tired, your body can only do so much. Same as I said, that's why you think of sleep and hunger, very similar patterns. That kind of helps a lot to conceptualize it. So also, if you go to bed earlier, so say now you're going to bed at 9 or 10, well, if your body is getting those 7 hours, if you're going to bed at 9, now you're going to be waking up at 4 in the morning, and you're trying to figure out why you're waking up at 4. And so then do you see how it can throw off that schedule?
Sure. Okay. So really, all right. So the prescription for better sleep is to get a pattern that works and keep your wake time as consistent as possible. And then there's some nuances there about adding 15 minutes if you're still not quite, if you're not fully rested. But so we've got a prescription for good sleep. What are the negative impacts if we don't get good sleep? And does that lead to, is it physical degradation? Is it mental? Do we create more anxiety? Because I can think of the times when I'm the most sleep deprived. I just feel like a weaker human. Like I'm, instead of like this far away from crying, I'm like this far, right? It's just like I'm weaker with everything.
Sorry, I was thinking of an Ozark example actually. But so I think there's 2 points that I want to make to that. So yes, we know that sleep, obviously, when we're getting full consistent sleep, our body's repaired. It's ready, in terms of like immune health and system health. And there's lots of research that shows that people are sleep deprived, having difficulties, whether it's from a health standpoint or, like people falling asleep at the wheel and other kinds of dangers. And we definitely see this difference in the emotion regulation. And if we're, not getting enough, then it may be that, again, memory, attention, focus, all those things are impaired. So yes, obviously sleep is a very important component for our health. But I also want to put the caveat out there that what happens is that sometimes though that people take that to the extreme and they put so much stress on themselves about getting sleep that if they have a poor night's sleep, and especially we're seeing this right now through COVID, is folks thinking, oh my gosh, well, I'm not getting a good night's sleep, so now I'm going to get it, or these things are going to happen. And so I feel like I have to also give the other perspective that, people aren't dying from insomnia. Obviously there's these rare cases and there's this fetal familial, and I'm not going to get into all the, the medical nerddom, but in general, if people are dying from insomnia, medication companies should be using that to sell more meds, right? Joking aside from that, it's the idea that if you have, the research actually shows that individuals with insomnia are really good at pooling their resources. If you think about you talk about having 4 kids, you had those periods where you were just trying to survive, but you still made it to work and still function. So I kind of want to give that hope piece to folks that if they're not getting perfect sleep, it doesn't mean that you're, going to die tomorrow, but we do need to get your sleep to a much better place to bolster your immune system. It is better for your health. Does that make sense in terms of
it does.
People get in their head, and then there's so much fear that that anxiety perpetuates them getting worse sleep. So we kind of need to be realistic that yes, sleep is really important for your health, but if it's not perfect right now, there's hope, and it doesn't mean that you're going to die tomorrow.
Yeah, I think it's to your point earlier about we do adjust and we do have reserves, and our body has learned to adjust over time. So it's not as though one bad night of sleep or a rough week puts us in a state where we're just going to go ahead and get COVID-19 because our immune system's gone. It seems, and then I guess to your point, you can worry more about it, you create more anxiety. And so your prescription though is to try to have an eye, first understand that you should get on a sleep schedule. Mm-hmm. And then when you're off that schedule, you've binged on Ozark, get back, try to stay on schedule as best as possible. Now, the question I have now too, another thing I think people are doing, there is a great meme that I've gotten many times from different text streams that are text strings, what is your, how's it go? Here's how to find your quarantine alcoholic name. It's your first name and your last name.
Yes.
And you've probably seen that. I think a lot of us have probably seen that, which is just, hey, I guess you've got a lot of people that have never been able to work from home. So you have a little less pressure in the morning. Not only are you not going to the office, but you also don't, I have 4 little kids. So usually in the morning, I got to get 4 kids to 4 separate schools. So there is always so much to do in the morning. So now you take away a set office time, you take away the bus, you take away really necessary. And again, if you look at these Zoom calls, you see people unshaven in t-shirts. So even the height or the grooming area, like meanwhile, I haven't gotten a haircut for 2 or 3 months, but you get all these different things that are now, okay, I have less things for a lot of folks, less pressure So maybe people, and I'm also self-medicating, let's say, because I'm nervous about COVID-19 and the economy. So you turn to you're drinking more alcohol than you normally would because of the crisis in so many different ways. Are you seeing that? And is that a normal, I guess it seems like a normal pattern that people get. Tell me about drinking too much wine, beer, whatever, and trying to think it's going to be good for sleep, but ultimately what does it do?
Sure. Well, and also I'm seeing a lot more of that with like people are wanting to find ways to connect. So they're having their virtual happy hours, which again, it's great to, taking that social distancing doesn't mean isolation. So it's good to do that. But seeing a lot of people, as you said, drinking more, or, I've seen that meme a lot. Also this is the second time this week that I went out to buy alcohol for the next 2 weeks, the ongoing things. I hear a lot of that. I think the thing for folks to understand, and if we take the kind of alcohol on sleep, is that a lot of people, they have been self-medicating, and now it's also that, I don't have to drive, so I can have an extra, or when's the last time I to sit and relax and enjoy this time, and we start justifying this. The thing is that, one, we don't want to become reliant on that as our only coping strategy. So we want to make sure that we're using other healthy coping strategies, specifically from a sleep perspective. So I'll say it this way. As we know, our body, there's all these different chemicals in our body. And whenever we're drinking, it oftentimes is going to have an effect on multiple chemicals, two of those being GABA and glutamate. And so GABA is the one that makes you feel tired and sleepy. And so our body likes to be in balance. Well, when we're drinking and it stimulates that, side of the chemicals that make us tired and sleepy, yes, you might have a few drinks and it may knock you out and put you to sleep. But that's thrown off the system. So the body's going to say, I used to have, just for simplicity's sake, 5 and 5, think of your balance. And now I've tipped the scales. So what happens is the body says, there's so much more here on this sleepy side. I need to start producing more on the awake side because it wants to get back into balance. But what ends up happening is that your body's metabolizing the alcohol, the scales get tipped in the other side. So for anybody that's ever had a hangover, you have the response where you drink a lot and you fall asleep, and a few hours later you wake up and you feel wide awake and your heart's beating, and you have that physical response because all that stimulant is now rushing through your body. And then you start thinking, what happened? And we start feeling the anxiety. And then through the rest of the time, it kind of is balancing back and forth, wanting to get back to that place. So oftentimes, when you're drinking, not only you're going to see that you will have some of that more kind of awakening or more of that stimulant and that stress on the body, but we're also not going to be getting the quality sleep. So just because you have a few drinks and you fall asleep doesn't mean that your body is going to be able to get into, that real deeper sleep or into the REM sleep. So we might kind of stay in that stage 2, where we aren't really going to get, you're not going to get the restoration and the repair, even though you're unconscious.
So it's GABA and then it's glutamate, or one kind of make you sleepy and one makes you awake?
Yeah, there's a lot more chemicals than that. But if you're thinking of the scale, the simplicity way, like I implemented a sleep treatment with an intensive outpatient group for individuals with addictions for a long time, and that's the way we kind of talk about it, is that when you're the GABA side and the alcohol kind of stimulates a lot of that with the sleepiness. And so when you tip the scales, say you have 5 and 5 in balance, and then you add 5 drinks. When you're at 10 and 5, the body wants to get back to balance. So it thinks that it's over producing on the other side. So it's like, okay, we're going to be even, but hopefully your liver and your body is processing the alcohol. So by the time it's metabolized, then we've tipped the scales. And so it has to come back in balance. And so we're going to see those effects on the quality of sleep we're going to get, the stages of sleep we can get into, and also triggering some of that kind of more stimulant to wake us up.
Well, then let me ask you then, what is your prescription for folks that they've been at home, the schedules have been off now for well over a month, call it almost a month and a half now, or month plus, and they've maybe been drinking. What is your advice on that? Are you really just better off not drinking at night? And your sleep is a lot better? Is there a responsible level? Do you tell people just to cut back? What is your prescription in the COVID more drinking world that we live in?
Right. Well, I mean, the thing again, that I have to acknowledge is everybody's body is different. Everybody's tolerance is different. You know, what they were doing pre and post. Some people were drinking too much pre-COVID as well. You know, and I have a lot of folks that are self-medicating in a lot of different ways to try to fall asleep. And I want to answer this, and then if we have time, I want to talk about the healthier ways to shut the brain off.
Yes.
But I think that, you know, for a lot of folks, it's, you don't want to be drinking a ton right before bed. You know, there's nothing wrong with having, you know, like you said, as long as obviously those that are drinking responsibly and age appropriate and all those other kind of health things. But for the average person, there's nothing wrong with having that glass of wine or that cocktail with dinner or having, you know, the after dinner drink. But you don't want to be drinking a lot right before bed. You want to space it out in a healthy way. You know, on average, the body's metabolizing the alcohol in one drink an hour. You know, if we think of the responsible drinking pattern habits to follow, we don't need to all of a sudden be drinking an entire bottle ourselves. Or, you know, a lot of people are drinking a lot earlier and drinking a long time throughout the day, seeing that you know, a lot more of that day drinking and other pieces. So I think it's, you have to just follow the responsible drinking pieces, but also just recognize that there will be an impact on sleep. Same for folks that if you can drink 3 cups of coffee right before bed and still fall asleep, we need to talk about your caffeine threshold.
Yeah. All right. Healthy ways to shut off the brain, and then exercise are the two things I want to make sure we talk about before we let you go.
Sure. Do you want me? Does it matter what order?
Yeah, no, I guess whatever's the logical order between those two. Do you want to get exercise to help your brain shut off, or can you shut your brain off no matter what?
Okay, so from the exercise standpoint, the first thing is the time of day to exercise. And so the piece to realize is that, you know, as we're exercising, if we think of, you know, raising our body temperature and just our whole system, again, your heart's racing, all those other things, you don't want to be doing things to stimulate the body right before you want to be falling asleep. So in terms of exercise, we know that exercising in the morning is a really great time, especially if you're getting up and getting outside. Light plays a huge part in our sleep. So, you know, that's why we say, for instance, you know, in the morning, you want to be getting light within the first, you know, few minutes, open your windows, being outside. It's the same reason at night where we actually don't want, you know, if you get up to use the bathroom, don't turn on all the lights. You know, the same thing with technology. We haven't even gotten into that with, because, you know, in terms of that little switch in our brain, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the SCN, that has that connection with the optic nerve that perceives light. Again, you know, it's when there's light out, it's safe, be awake. When it's dark out, it's time to sleep. So when you're exercising in the morning and you're outside or you're getting that light, it's that whole thing to get the body up and running. Now, if you also exercising in the afternoon, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, typically our body temperature is up, you know, 1 or 2 more degrees. So for your muscles and other pieces being a little more warmed up, we just don't want to be exercising too close to bedtime because that will throw off your ability to fall asleep. But exercise is a really great thing because when we're more active, we're going to increase how tired we are. It's going to help us to feel more sleepy, to fall asleep. A lot of people that were active and now that gyms are closed and other things are also finding that they're needing less sleep or having a harder time to fall asleep. And for a lot of people, exercise is a time for them to kind of decompress and really help their brain to shut off. So that
you're very good at this. So it's now we transition into shutting off the brain, which yeah, all of the tips and tricks you have to do that. And I think off the top of my head, obviously the question about, do you check your email before you go to bed? You stop watching TV well before you have to go to sleep? Do you have it super dark? Or what are the things that we can do? Somebody can listen to this and try to implement relatively quickly that may start at least getting them in a better direction for sleep.
Sure. So you touched on the sleep environment and a few tactics. So let me kind of throw those all in there together. So for the ideal sleep environments, first, we want it to be dark, and eye mask is fine, window treatments, whatever it is. We want it to be cold enough that you need a cover. You want it to be quiet. Now, for some people, you know, those that are used to living in New York City and places with loud noise, there's a difference between quiet and noise that's going to wake you up. So if you need that noise, we want static noise. It could be a white noise machine, a fan. You don't want the TV running in the background, not only from the light perspective, but also from the voices. If you've ever noticed that commercials get a lot louder, that change in volume can wake you up. The voices can trigger that kind of, oh, is there someone in the room? Is there a threat? Same thing with music. music, if it's good quality music, you're going to have the crescendos and the decrescendos. You're going to have the volume changes, and even the instrumentals can wake you up. So you want that, either that static noise, but the quiet, the dark, the cold, the comfortable bed. Wind down routines can be very helpful. You know, as you touched on, if you're using technology, ideally we're not going to be on our phones right up to that moment. If you think about how much light is on your phone, if you touch the screen and it can light up the entire room, think how much light is getting right into your eyes right before. And light can actually delay you falling asleep by over an hour or wake you up earlier. So we want to be careful with that. If you do want to watch your TV and things at night, it'd be better to have the overhead lights off, less light. The other trick, and then I'll get to the last piece for shutting your brain off. When you're watching TV at night, and to keep your, not only do we want to just be sleeping in bed, we don't want to be sleeping anywhere else. Because that's the other thing that people are falling into right now with COVID, is falling asleep on the couch, then getting up and moving to their bed, or taking those naps throughout the day. You want it, your brain's going to get confused. Am I supposed to be awake here? Am I supposed to be asleep? So you want to just be sleeping in your bed. If you're watching TV on the couch before bed, a trick, if you put your head in your hands and your hands on your knees, when you start to fall asleep, you're going to have that jolt, and it's going to wake you up instead of being comfortable and falling asleep with your head back on the couch. So just some little tricks with that. As we're doing that wind down routine, whether it's, for some people, it may be, you know, doing mindfulness exercise or meditation. For other people, it could be doing stretching. Progressive muscle relaxation is a really great one for people to relieve the tension throughout their body throughout the day. There's a million free apps with that. And folks that have restless leg or chronic pain, actually doing a muscle relaxation exercise before bed helps to relieve some of that pain, some of the twitching and other pieces.
Progressive muscle relaxation. I haven't heard of. And what would be an example of an app that would help you with that?
Sure. So you'll hear folks in the industry call it PMR, or progressive muscle relaxation. What it is you're literally systematically tightening and releasing your muscles. So Wes, I'm going to make you do this with me for a second, and then I'll give you the last tip. Okay?
I'm going to fall asleep after this. Yeah.
Well, if my talking hasn't put you to sleep, I say as a sleep expert, my goal is to not put people to sleep while talking about it.
No, I'm awake. Yeah.
No. So, all right. So if you sit and you see where you're sitting right now and kind of get a sense of where your shoulders are at, right? So now I want you to take your shoulders and I want you to lift them up as high as you can to your ears, like literally high, like higher. Come on, you go higher, tighter, tighter, and then quick release. When you drop, you'll notice that your shoulders actually are sitting a little bit lower than they did a second ago. What happens is we naturally hold tension throughout our body throughout the day. If we're driving, typing, you know, whatever we're doing, shoulders is just one example. But when you tighten those muscles and then quickly release, it actually tightens and helps to elongate to relieve the tension. So what progressive muscle relaxation does is it starts head and goes all the way through, where you're like tightening your face and your hands, and it goes all the way through the system. And a lot of people find tension that they didn't realize that they were holding. And so that actually, as your brain is constantly scanning the body, when you're breathing, when you're starting to breathe faster, it says, oh, there must be a threat. And it'll start, you know, producing the chemicals, you know, your cortisol, your adrenaline. Same thing when it's like, oh, the muscles are tense, there must be a threat. That fight or flight response we talked about before. So all of a sudden, when you relieve the tension, your brain's scanning and says, oh, the tension's gone. Or, oh, he's breathing slower. It's a good time where I can relax. And it starts to put that in motion. Now, these are all the physical pieces. Let's talk about how to really shut that brain off. Now, I'm going to give you some advice, and I will tell you this. Most of my corporate execs, to my patients, everyone that I give this to, when I first tell them, they look at me and tell me that I'm crazy. And then I say, suspend judgment, do it for a few days, and you'll be surprised. Okay?
I love this. Go ahead. I cannot wait to hear this. So shut down. This is, again, how to shut down the brain. Mm-hmm. You could talk to companies about this.
Oh, I do all the time. Oh, this is one of the things when usually when in those first coaching sessions, or when I'm doing those larger talks with especially a lot of folks that I'll see really high stress, whether it's a lot of my folks right now in the finance industry with the economy and what's going on. But what happens is that, you know, we're going throughout the day. And there's all that's happening, and it's really easy to distract ourselves and not to focus on the things that we're worried about, or not to be, you know, but what happens is then when we are getting in bed and we've shut off the lights and the TV isn't on and there's nothing else to distract us, we're alone with our mind. Scary. So what happens is that we need to process. And if you've ever noticed that, where you may be lying in your bed and your mind's running and racing. So what I recommend to folks is about 10 to 15 minutes before bed, you want to be not in your bed, but you want to old school, take a notepad and a pen or a journal. Not on your computer, not on your iPhone, not on any of those other things. You want a notepad and a pen, and you're going to sit down and you are going to brain dump.
So we're alone with our minds.
Sure, no. So so at night when you're getting into bed, and that's why a lot of people tend to need a television or a noise or something, is they want to keep their mind distracted, because when there's nothing else and it's quiet and it's dark, then that's when a lot of people, their mind is running because they haven't allotted that time throughout the day to process, and our brain needs to do that. So what I recommend is, I call it, literally prescribed, whether you call it worry time, process time, but about 10 to 15 minutes before bed, you're going to sit down with a notepad and a pen. And it's really important to physically write this, not to do this on technology and electronics. Down the right-hand side of the page, I say, write your to-do list for the next day. So write down, I got to go to the dry cleaners, got to go to the bank, have to make these phone calls. Because you're going to lay in bed and think about what you need to do the next day. And if you're trying to remember it, again, it's the same thing as that computer where you're trying to shut it off, but if it's still running in the background, it can't. Then on the left side of the page, on the rest of it, you are literally going to brain dump, for lack of a technical way to say it, verbal vomit, everything that's running through your mind. And what you'll notice is the first minute is going to be the stuff that you're worrying about. Worried about finances, worried about my kids. But as you really start writing, all of this stuff is going to come out that you might say, I had no idea I was worrying about that. Or you're going to be processing positive things as well. But as you're doing that, we're not creating worries. We're not causing you to worry more. We're actually, all that stuff that's been running in the background, we're now getting on the page for you to be able to address. I tell people that anxiety, that worry, those thoughts, it's just like when you get that virus on the computer that's running in the background, and so the computer slows down.
Slows everything down, yeah.
Because all the resources. So when you're actually getting that out and seeing what's going on, then one, it's right there in front of you, so you can actually problem solve through it, start to see solutions, but also you're getting it out of your mind and freeing that space. You take it, you're putting it on that notepad, just like you have a million photos on your phone and they're great, but you run out of space, you have to download them to the hard drive. You're putting there somewhere safe, but it doesn't have to physically be there. So as you're doing that, for most people, you actually feel really exhausted afterwards, just like that, ugly cry or that cathartic, just angry scream. Like most people feel really tired after doing that, but you take it, you put it on the nightstand, and then you can get in bed and fall asleep, because what you're doing is you're training your brain. No, we don't worry in bed. We do that outside of bed. Just like if you're potty training a puppy, nope, we go potty outside. You're telling your brain it has to. And if you wake up in the middle of the night with your mind's running and racing, get out of bed, write it on the sheet of paper. If you have that amazing idea to solve everything, do not email your colleagues at 3 a.m. Don't turn on the screen and the light. Write it on that sheet of paper. And when it's time to wake up, that's when you get up. If your alarm hasn't gone off, you don't need to check the clock. It's not time to get out of bed yet.
Let me ask you this. With this, I love this checklist so much. I love this idea. You said you don't do that in bed, though. You do it right. You do it while you're laying in bed, or right before you get into bed?
Before you get into bed, because you really want to make. So the idea with the bed is, so let me ask you this. If you were going to go to the movie theater, you were going to go see the movies, and somebody said you were going to get a snack, what's the snack that most people would think of?
Popcorn.
So you think movies, popcorn. Doesn't mean that there isn't soda and snow caps and everything else.
Mike and Ike's, yeah.
Right, but it's movies, popcorn. You want your brain to think bed, sleep, not bed, read, bed, TV, bed, process, all those other things. So you want to be doing that writing outside of bed. I usually tell people to start with 5 minutes. Set a timer on your phone. 5 minutes is going to feel like a really long time, but then you build up to 10, 15 minutes. You start to get in this habit, and then your brain learns, okay, he's going to give me time to process. And that's the same thing where when you do that in the middle of the night, so when you're getting out of bed to do it, but you also know it's right there. It's on the nightstand. If you, the next day, as soon as you get up, your to-do list is right there, which also actually makes you a lot more efficient. Because if you write down those 6 to 10 most important things to do the next day, even if you are stressed, you have it right there, and you can jump right into it without even having to really have that full first cup of coffee.
I love that. What a really good exercise. And so if you're having trouble falling asleep and you've got that racing mind, this is a cognitive behavior therapy. I don't know, what would you call this? Or you like an exercise to help?
Yes, definitely. And so a lot of the strategies I'm sharing with you are taken from a treatment called CBTI, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy for Insomnia. But what's great is actually the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, that's the gold standard treatment. And what's great, I mean, is I think I mentioned in my article, I literally, a few years ago was working with a Vietnam vet that had not slept well since the war. And in a few weeks, we got him sleeping through the night. Like
wow. Without medicine, we're talking about this behavioral therapy.
Yes, but that's, I think, the statement for folks to realize is a lot of people feel like, oh my gosh, I've been an insomniac for years, now it's even worse, am I a lost cause? And I think there's that piece of realizing that you really can take control back over it, but you have to follow some of these strategies. Be careful to not follow into those do's and don'ts of extending that time in bed, or the fact of, if you're waking up a bunch of times to use the restroom in the middle of the night, maybe we cut back how much liquid even water that we're drinking. If you wake up in the middle of the night, don't eat a big snack and drink a lot of water, because then your body's going to learn that that's when to get nutrients and it's going to wake you up again. Same thing with caffeine. Do you know how long it takes for to metabolize the average amount of caffeine in one cup of coffee?
I would say, I don't know. It seems like a while. How long is it?
So on average, it's about 7 to 8 hours.
What?
So,
no,
yeah.
I wouldn't.
Most people think a lot less. So if you're having, 2-3 cups of coffee, if you want to go to bed at 10, you really need to stop drinking coffee around 2. And that's, again, so there's all, and if you're exercising later in the day, there's so much with, like the protein powders and pieces. Again, I'm not saying you shouldn't do any of these. I'm not saying you should never drink again or never have caffeine. It's just being strategic and seeing how your body works. If it isn't broken, you don't have to fix it. But that's the gold standard. Fall asleep within 10 to 15 minutes, sleep straight through the night, wake up and feel rested, and then not having that fatigue throughout the day, having that clear mind.
Part of this is like, I think back to having kids and then having a white noise machine let's say a white noise machine for the kids. And then for some reason I started to need a white noise machine. And now I play, I think it's brown noise or pink noise or rain on a loop all throughout the night. And I actually can't even sleep without it. Like I remember being at a camp with my son like 2 years ago, and I had to turn my iPhone sleep machine. This is terrible.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's an app for that.
I was in nature, and I was like, it's too quiet. I need my sound machine. So I really need. I've become so dependent on that. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, that's kind of what I was talking about before with, folks that are used to living in a city, they're used to that ambient noise, and that's what's conditioned them for sleep. Just like classical conditioning, right? Pavlov's dog, ring a bell means food. And that's why for a lot of people, the noise piece, it's fine as long as it's static. That rain on a tent or that, noise or whatever. The problem is the changes in the variability of the sound, the softening and louding is more, that's what's going to jolt someone awake. But I mean, that's where that wind down routine again is very helpful. If you're every night, okay, I'm going to wash my face and brush my teeth and put on my PJs and do this, and your body's learning that process, right? It's just like the routine you do with kids as well. And so that's why for a lot of people, like they've conditioned themselves that, well, I have to watch that TV or I have to read that book. And then they stay at a friend's house and there isn't a TV in the room and they can't fall asleep. That's why we want to make sure that we're taking away those conditioned responses that trigger sleep, and they're things that we can control. But something like a static noise is completely fine because that's not going to disrupt it, and that's common for a lot of people.
So where do we find you, and where do our folks find you besides the Bear? I know that I met you through a Barron's conference, and you had rave reviews at Barron's. So I know you do speaking, but do we find you on LinkedIn? If you want to maybe tell me about the main areas that you work through besides the University of the University of South Carolina, where do we find it?
Sure. LinkedIn is a really great way to reach me in terms of professional contacts, just because I'm on there. It has all my contact information. Aside from, as I said, being the faculty at the medical university and a clinical assessment advisor for PAR, I do speak. I have my own consulting company, Mind Impact Consulting, and I'm part of the Birch CoOp Collective. I think I've provided you with some of those websites that folks can find. For those that are listening through the podcast, if you want to find me on LinkedIn, it's Melissa, the normal spelling, and then my last name is Milanak, Milanak. So LinkedIn is probably the best way, but if you want to see some of the articles I've put out, I have sleep guides, stress anxiety management through COVID. You can find those on the Birch Cove Collective website as well.
The Birch Cove Collective, and that is a resource for, it's several different professionals that do kind of multidiscipline. Tell me about the Birch Cove Collective for a sec.
Yeah, so Birch Cove, it's actually birchcove.co. It was founded by Sarah Parkins, and it's based out of New York. And so with that collective, there's a number of speakers. You have people from industry that do data analytics and, OD work, folks that are doing more speaking on self-actualization, programs, experiential, but it's really focused and targeted for companies, businesses, corporations, for all different, whether it's doing workshops, keynotes, different experiences, all within the world of well-being and thoughtfulness. And so I'm the head of well-being programs there. So I work very closely with Sarah to help design a number of those programs that we're doing. And so we go into a lot of different businesses. And again, a lot of the speaking, whether it's for their annual conferences, doing workshops for teams, a lot of team building and a lot of those offsites. A lot of times when they have those, are bringing in their clients and wanting to offer, because there is so much more of a focus now on not just the nuts and bolts of business, but also the well-being. And I think that's a great thing that we're seeing the industry transition to, is recognizing that the mindset, that's my tagline for Mind Impact, is mindset influences needs and decisions. It really drives your, the anxiety, the stress, the sleep. That really is what plays a key underlying foundation for productivity, optimal performance. You see, company culture, the quality of work that you're getting, less attrition, retention, so many different components that are provided through targeting those areas.
Wellness, well-being, and thoughtfulness. And we're in the business of happy retirees. And I have a book called You Can Retire Sooner Than You Think, the 5 Money Secrets of the Happiest Retirees. Mm-hmm. So a part of that, and I have a new book coming out, gosh, maybe it's COVID delayed for a while as I'm kind of in the middle of writing it, but there's definitely a section that has more of a focus on well-being. And I think I love your thought. I love the thought of thoughtfulness in the workplace and how it makes, we can make better decisions as executives and at companies as well and as business owners. So thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was great. And yes, if any of your listeners have any questions or anything else, you know how to reach me.